Welcome everyone as you continue to join us. Looking forward to having a great session here today. Ladies and gentlemen, innovation is crucial to any organization's ability to distinguish itself from competitors. When you add in the power of disruption and its impact, whether you are a disruptor or a benefit of the disruption, the ability to build innovation into the, very fabric of your company becomes apparent. So we've got three great panelists today to share a conversation with me for the next 45 minutes to an hour. We've got Bill Nottingham, the Vice President of Growth at Nottingham Spurk. Give me a wave. Rick Phelps from Action Coach. Rick, give us a wave, partner over there. And Steve Santamaria, the CEO of Folio Photonics. Give us a wave there. So gentlemen, we'll start this conversation with the idea just around innovation itself as a competitive advantage. And Bill, you've been playing in the space with the company and your father and his partner for many, many years now. How can innovation be leveraged as a competitive advantage?
Well, here's the thing. I always say, I read this article recently called "Innovation's a Marathon, Not a Sprint." It has to be in your DNA, and your competitive advantage is your ability to change, your ability to adapt. Take this for example. Our firm was affected like anybody else, but we did what we do best. We completely adapted, we changed, and we just kept moving. And so I think that muscle is important to keep working.
Interesting. Rick, what have you seen as regards to working with folks on that ability to use innovation as their competitive advantage?
I think one of the keys to really leveraging innovation is how you develop and build your whole workforce from the shop floor all the way up. Building a business that actually learns constantly and is innovating not only at the larger level, like we're talking about here, but also innovating at the smaller level. The business that can get people basically running a massive multi-layered experiment where everybody is testing and measuring and learning and improving. That culture and that environment will make the implementation of new technologies just dovetail in because it's part of what they do. They're not used to being stuck. They're used to being creative in all aspects of business. So I think how you build your culture and how you engage people in constantly learning and growing as individuals at all levels of the organization really knits it into the fabric of the organization and leverages.
Well, thanks. Steve, from your perspective, creating companies, you spent years with Intel out in Silicon Valley. That competitive advantage itself of what makes a company different. I've always thought that it's, if you can get everybody thinking about the words, what if, every day when they walk into the organization, that you have a mindset change. How do you try to use that concept to really create that competitive advantage so that you can really separate yourself?
See, one of the things working at Intel, you learn right off the bat, Andy Grove always said, only the paranoid survive. And you just have to understand that life is not static. The only constant is change. Everything is always changing. So when people get complacent saying, well, we're doing it this way, we've always done it this way, that's kind of a red flag. You always have to be examining yourself, because if you're not, somebody else is looking at that to do it faster, better, or cheaper than the way you're doing yourself. And so it's more cultural. Like, you should never sit on your laurels. You always have to be looking at it and be open to change and then embrace it. And that's what we try to do. Like the startup company I have right now, we talk all the time about what's happening around us and how that might impact us.
I want to play a little bit off of what you talked about with what Andy Grove said. You got to be a little paranoid. How did you guys do that? I mean, what was it like when you would walk in each day?
It was just the expectation of execution, and you were allowed to challenge up. So the environment was, it was a top-down organization, but if I had a question, I'm allowed to ask it. And you were encouraged to have, we call it a constructive confrontation. You could challenge, and you could have a great dialogue, and no one's going to get hurt. No one's going to get upset. And you can do that across the organization, up and down. And it was an open door policy. It just worked. And it's tough to do. I'm going to tell you, it's tough to do, to have someone walk in and challenge you what you firmly believe in, but you're trained to kind of absorb that. And the whole organization, I'm talking 100,000 people could walk in and talk to Andy if they wanted to.
You know, it's interesting. I was heard, one of the things that Steve mentioned was the whole what if, and I think it might have been you, Dustin. What if is an important question to ask. But if you really want to make sure your culture is innovative, you have to deliver on that. So these what ifs have to become something that actually happens, whether it's a product, whether it's a change in the organization. You have to show action, and then you're going to get people supporting you and doing more.
When you talk about showing action, I mean, what are some ways? I mean, Bill, you work with some of the largest companies in the world who are known for their innovation. I mean, what does that action look like? I mean, it's one thing to roll out a new product or a service. It's another thing for it to be part of your fabric.
You know, half the battle is getting things through the machine. You know, getting the right deal done. You know, we spent a good several months on the right deal with a Fortune 50 company. That's important. You got to get the culture fit right. You know, the thing is, you have to be able to be willing to fail or walk away. You have to be able to understand when you need to change or pivot. But anyway, you have to also show that your team that you're trying. And it's nobody's perfect, but you just need to make sure that people feel like they've been heard.
Does that go down to inclusion, making sure? I mean, Steve talked about having an open door policy, but that is not poo-pooing an idea, or what's your approach to that?
Well, there's certainly bad ideas, but I think that you need to be willing to set the ground rules. So if you're in a brainstorm, you don't necessarily want to announce that something's bad, because sometimes the most horrible idea will lead to something truly spectacular because we're laughing at, you know, that's crazy. But then wait a second, hold on. What if we did this? And if we would have been like already making people feel horrible about not coming up with something great, you never would have gotten that gold that you really need to do.
Rick,
I think it's one thing, Justin. I think it's really important that you set this message and this culture tops down. Because as CEO of a company or as an executive in a company, new people are going to be very reluctant to bring things up, or younger people who have some of the best ideas because they're afraid to get kind of squashed. And so if you don't give it time and you don't have a process for you to evaluate these opportunities, then it's not going to happen. It just won't happen. And, you know, I've seen it happen in a lot of companies like that, where it's just so tops down driven that people just won't offer ideas, and then they leave, right? And then good ideas walk out the door.
Yeah, and obviously, you know, to have people who are comfortable. I mean, the ground swelling from the bottom up for great ideas and innovation is typically where a lot of it comes from. Rick, the challenge is, and you work with a lot of CEOs, the challenge is getting them to accept that. I mean, a lot of them feel like they've gotten to that point because they may have been either the smartest person in the room or been able to surround themselves with the smartest person. And many entrepreneurs do it because they've gotten expertise. I was talking to somebody who's a mechanical engineer. He owns 3 mechanical engineering companies. He surrounds himself with good people, but he also sets the vision because that's his background. But how do you get somebody to change their mentality if they were like that, to be able to say, you know what, I'm going to hire these people and ideas are going to come from the front lines?
That's a great question, Dustin. A big piece of the puzzle, and it gets back to what Stephen was saying about constructive challenging, is understanding communication and how humans communicate, and that we don't all communicate the same way. We don't like to be communicated the same way. And so understanding how every member of your team wants to be communicated to, what motivates them, what works, what doesn't work, you need to understand that, and you need to be able to adapt as a leader and be able to take the challenges that come at you, because they're not always coming at you the way you would expect them to. And so one of the important things we do is help organizations learn how to understand the different personality types, the different motivations in an organization, and therefore how to communicate so that when you constructively challenge, the message gets through. Because true communication is the response you get. And if the response you get is just a ton of crap dumped on you, that stifles things, right? Or just a negative response in general. And so understanding the communication models, understanding how to communicate, understanding the impact you're having on the people on your team, really, really important. Particularly at the CEO level, where if he doesn't create the environment where the honest feedback is happening, that communication channel is lost.
And it's also, you have to make time, right? And this is what happens to most companies. It's the tyranny of the urgent, where you're so focused short term that you can never take a second to contemplate on what if questions. I mean, that's a great point, Bill. You said, let's do what ifs. But, I'm looking at my to-do list on my whiteboard. There's still 9 things on here. And I'm like, oh, crap, I got a lot of stuff to do this week, right? But I have to find time to think strategically. And I'll give you an anecdote. So Bill Gates did, he's a great, brilliant guy, but he took 3 weeks every year and he went to his beach house with no internet, no TV or anything. And he just sat there and his team would deliver white papers to him that were produced internally. And he would read them. If he wanted, he'd bring the engineers in. But that's how he pivoted into the internet. That's how he pivoted to some of their biggest product moves, where something where he just forced himself 3 weeks. I'm not going to run the company. I'm just going to think. He called it Think Week. And, and ideas were brought to him and they would nurture them. And so, you got to add an element to that in your own day. So when am I just sitting here thinking a little bit, right? Where I'm not doing my to-do list, because, that's when the good stuff happens.
You do that yourself, Steve?
I try to, yes. Yes, I do.
How much time do you spend doing that?
Probably, I'm saying about a half a day a week that I'll be reading journals or read, things outside of the scope or the day-to-day of my company. Or I'll talk, or I'll have an interesting meeting with people. I volunteer for things like this conversation, because just hearing these guys, like I wouldn't have met Rick or Bill normally, but hearing them talk, I'm taking notes as we go. So as much as I am presenting, I'm also here listening really actively.
Yeah, I'll play off that a little bit. I like to do things that I normally would do, like wash the dishes or clean out the garage or just play with my kids. The funny thing that happens is when you turn off, you get like these amazing ideas. My favorite, I don't know if you guys do this, driving, my commute. I mean, I can't wait till autonomous cars come out, because I'm going to be like, idea 1, idea 2, idea 3.
Now, Bill, about 15, 20 years ago, I asked your dad this question about where they come up with ideas. And your dad, among other good answers, he said that sometimes he just walks up. Yeah, he said he sometimes just walked up and down the aisles of a department store or a big box store and looked at what people were selling. And then he said, what's not here? What solutions don't exist?
I'll tell you a real funny story. It's hard to get out of CVS, but my funniest story is the most amazing packaging of all places is a Sephora. And I know that sounds silly, but I go with my wife to a Sephora and I get lost looking through the aisles. And then the funny part is I get the attendant saying, the men's section's over here. And I'm like, no, I'm just trying to look at, they don't understand. But, honestly though, it's about really seeing through things. And you're right, seeing what's not there and watching people sometimes without, watching them, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I used to, when there were malls, as a young journalist, I used to go and I would sit and just people watch, and I would look at people's behavior, and I would get a good sense of how people interacted both with each other and with their surroundings around them. And it gave me good insight on social behavior as then a young journalist really trying to write about these kind of things. From an innovation perspective though, Bill, when you're dealing with the CEOs of companies, like the folks who are attending this conference, entrepreneurs, how do you get them to think about innovation beyond a product or service rollout conception?
You start with the customer. We are customers, but we aren't the customer. We start with, really deep diving and one of our favorite questions is, what ticked you off this week? What thing you did that is just frustrating? There's a product there. And, the biggest thing about any CEO or president is, I think we heard somebody talking about that, is having the right people around you, having the right people to challenge you. I went to art school and I got critiqued every day. It was normal. I'm used to it.
You guys are in product design. A lot of what you do is helping people create intellectual property that adds value to their companies. And your organization has worked with, the who's who of organizations, from Procter & Gamble to Sherwin-Williams and everyone in between. Product design. is a big thing. You look down at, a mouse or a pen or something that you use, and it's designed for utility and it's designed for aestheticism. As you look at innovation and people here who are thinking about their own organizations and what they do, how much does the product design itself play into its utility?
Well, it's interesting. I'm going to throw a softball to Steve because I think design is amazing and I am a designer, but if the intel inside doesn't work, it doesn't matter. I mean, everything's smart, right?
Yeah, I'm the worst person to throw a product design question at because that's magic to me when people do that. I mean, I make infrastructure stuff that just works that we quickly put into a box and hide. And so when I see something beautiful like an iPhone or something like wow, that is, I'm like, I'm a fanboy. So wrong person to ask on product design, but I agree on the functional and and there are, it's black magic, right? That the people who are artists that can create that form and function and do that. And I don't know how they do it. I don't have that gene, right? I'm more grinding up from the bottom.
I actually think most people have it. I think you have it more than you think. I think most people can create anything, like the Andy Warhol concept. I think more people have the ability than you believe. You have to trust the process and give it a shot. I'll bet you you could probably be a designer.
Rick, you deal with personalities. Do you explore those elements of somebody? A lot of times I would think, and I had a business coach years ago that worked with me on a few different aspects of management technique and leadership, but I never had anybody that really worked on me on how I would approach my own creativity. Do you find that is something that is more relevant these days than just straightforward leadership and being a good leader?
There's an interesting dynamic, and it gets back to what Bill was talking about on when are we creative and how are we creative. And there's actually a disease in our society and our world today, and that's we think too much. And we get ourselves wrapped in our brains. And I guess one of the biggest surprises for me and now of my clients is that that voice in your brain that keeps telling you all what's going on, most of the time it's BS. And one of the most powerful things you can do is learn to recognize that this little storyteller that's out there is just like, go away and take the quiet, get out into nature, go to Sephora or wherever, and just get lost in it and go inside, not constantly in your brain, because that's where the true creativity comes from. Creative people, they happen in the shower, right? I mean, how often have we heard that, right? Or they happen in different weird places where you weren't thinking about it, but your brain is processing it. And so one of the things we work with folks on is to recognize that all that thinking gets in the way and shut it off. Learn how to shut it off so that you can tap into something deeper and more creative. When Einstein was asked where the theory of relativity came from, he didn't say, well, I was thinking about it and it came to me. He said,
Yeah.
I was like, I don't remember what I was doing. And all of a sudden, there it was. If we never create that pause for there it was, then we don't create that opportunity. And it's personal and it's professional. You need to do that for yourself. You need to create the time to think, to get away from it all, and you need to create the opportunity for your people to do the same.
Rick, I keep a pad and a pen on the table next to my bed. But for me, it's always like 3 a.m.
Yep.
where I go and I'm like working on a gnarly problem here at work or how to pitch something or do it. And all of a sudden I get a moment of clarity. And I've learned that if I go to sleep, I'll forget it. And I'll know I thought it, but I can't recreate it. It's like keep the pen and paper, boom, light comes on, and I just scribble down a note to remind myself so that I come in. This happened to me just a week ago. It just happened last week. We had a big thing coming up on Thursday. And I'm like trying what's the angle here? I couldn't figure it out. And, there's all kinds of drafting going on, a lot of communication in the company. And I go, all of a sudden, boom, moment of clarity. And everything lined up. And I don't know why it happened then,
Because you quit
I don't
thinking.
know, but it did. And I wrote it down and I was able to translate it and bring it back. So I always keep a pen and paper right next to me in my bedroom because that's where it generally happens at a weird hour. This is my wife off to no end.
You got to do it even. I'm sorry, go ahead, Bill.
I was just saying, Rick, it's funny. Too many people self-filter, It's like you're killing your own ideas before you say it.
No, and to play off what you're saying, Steve, as a writer, I keep pads everywhere. I've got little notepads in my car. I've got voice memos everywhere. I've got notepads. I've actually sketched out a business problem on the inside of the shower door, and then quickly run out, barely in a towel to scribble it down. Things like that. And I'll tell you what a really great one is. And Rick, from your standpoint, you kind of call it the voice in the head. The voice in my head is ingoing monologue with myself. And, being a little bit ADHD has been beneficial because it allows me to have inner monologue while my other part of my brain is working out whatever business problem I'm dealing with for smart business. But the writer in me is kind of going, wouldn't that be interesting if, and
I want to see one of these interviews, Justin.
Oh, they're great. Let me tell you, ask my wife can attest to the fact that several of the books I've written over the years have come out of crazy monologues with myself, and she's been a witness to that. 3 of my bestsellers, actually. But from a writing perspective, and for the CEOs here, I'm going to give you an example of how you can take a writer's creativity perspective and apply it into the business world. He's not my favorite writer, but one of my favorite stories was an interview I had. I was able to listen to at a business conference with Stephen King years ago. And somebody asked Stephen King about the power of creativity and where he came up with his ideas. And when he said, I basically just sit around and say, what if this happened? And then I follow the trail of thought from there. And the example he gave was with his first novel, Salem's Lot. And when I give presentations on innovation, I talk about that because it is the most brilliant and most simplistic concept you can ever think of. But if you apply this to your own business and start with this as a concept, not literally, but figuratively, the world is pretty much open from there. He said, I liked vampires. And I thought to myself, I live in Maine, and what would happen if a vampire happened to be popped into and dropped into a small Maine town like where I live? And he goes, okay, well, they'd have to eat. They'd have to, turn people and all these other things. And he basically just kind of went from there. What would happen if? And it suddenly became the story of Salem's Lot. Visitors came and they would disappear and they'd eventually turn everybody in the town and they would need tourists in order to deal with it. And you can see how the story of Salem's Lot came around. Every one of his books after that used the same premise of what would happen if. And the concept is just so simple.
I love that idea because, it's funny. Try this in a brainstorm session. Let's say anybody comes up with any idea. Rather than saying, well, let me think of my own idea, or that's not a good idea. What if you literally bridged off of it, no matter what it was? And then somebody else will do the same. It's like the power of and instead of the power of but,
That's what a writer does. A writer will, this is why also people, I say everybody's got a novel in them. Everybody's got a book in them in some way, shape, or form, fiction or nonfiction. Their challenge is they sit down and they just start writing from scratch. They don't necessarily play out the string of the idea first. If you play out the string of the idea first and just see which directions it can go, you will find exactly where you would have run into what they would call writer's block, and I would just call not thinking it through all the way. I believe there's no such thing as writer's block. I believe it's you reach the point where there's too many diverged paths in the road. And the same thing goes for business. Too many if-then theories. And when you reach in business too many if-then theories, you get paralyzed. You can't act from there, and you start making irrational risks with your company. And the same thing goes for writing. If you follow the train through, you can see, well, if this character has this thing happen to them, then these things could happen down the road. And you can work backwards from there, or you can work backwards like Hitchcock and start with the end in mind. Hitchcock's my favorite director. He would start with somebody sitting on a chair, back up, there's a bomb under the chair. Then he'd back up to 3 days earlier and tell the story. He'd start with somebody standing. They'd back up and realize they're on the side of a building. And then he'd back up 24 hours later and start the story. That's innovation. The concept of being able to think ideas through with no limitations. So,
the thing that I do, you asked earlier, but my board meetings, so they're usually 3 to 4 hours, but I reserve about 45 minutes of my board meeting where I pose an open-ended question. That's what if we do this, or what if this happens? And then I let the board, because this is where their smarts come into play and all their experience, because they always take it different than where, if I project every time saying, I think the conversation will go this way, it never goes that way. And it just opens up so many new ideas that we can, some of them don't work, to your point, but I know I use my board for that, and I've gotten good feedback from them. They like that exercise, that they're kind of surprised with an open-ended question, and they just get to kind of riff on it for a little bit. And it's done really good things for the company, in the last 2 years, where they've come up with ideas going, that's an angle I never thought about. Because, you have your own set of, I have my own set of blinkers on. I see kind of, get tunnel vision sometimes. But having them throw that idea, and a lot of times it makes work for me, because I don't have to go research it all. I'm doing one right now that they threw at me last board meeting. And it's one of those, thought it was a little problem. It's a big problem, and it's taking me a lot of time, but it's, I'm learning a lot. And I never would have done it on myself. Never would have done it by myself.
Interesting. Folks, we're going to take some questions in a few minutes, but I want to pivot a little bit to the idea around disruption, because as you think of these ideas, you play all the scenarios out. You never know what you're going to come up with. But the idea around disruption and how something, you can either be the disruptor, you can be disrupted, or you can take advantage of disruption and benefit from the disruption. Steve, I want to start with you, because you were sharing a story with us this morning about the idea around what you did at Intel. But I love the concept of thinking about, I always thought it was, you can either be the disruptor or you can be disrupted. But that third component of benefiting from disruption, not being the first to market. I always understood that if you're not always the first to market, that's not a bad thing. But talk a little bit about your thoughts on that.
Well, there's a certain awareness in your industry and looking strategically at what everyone else is doing, because it's not always, I think the example we talked about was Henry Ford and the Ford motor car, which, yes, automobile industry is a $3 trillion industry. It's huge. But alongside of that came steel, came tires, came gas stations, vacations. Prior to the automobile, there were no vacations. You didn't vacation. People live in their own village. And so all these things open up. And if you're an entrepreneur, you're smart. You're watching these big, paradigm shifting changes that are happening right now in the world we live in, and saying, how can I get on that wave? How can I ride that? I got an example here. This is a computer hard disk, right? From 1970, made by IBM. It held 18 megabytes of data, which isn't even one song. It cost $10,000, right? In 1970. And like my company, we make a disk now that's a terabyte for $1. And I tell everybody I talk to, when you look at computers, data storage and transmission, assume that it's all going to be free. You say, I'm going to spend $50,000 on a computer. Imagine it being free, and tell yourself, what would you do with that if it's free? What if you have instantaneous communication? Because this is what 5G is, right? That I want to talk to somebody, I want to share something. Imagine instantaneous, and it's going to be free. Because that's what all these big companies are doing. They're driving that cost down to zero. And so you on the back end of it saying, well, my life would change if this was free. Either compute power, data storage, transmission of data, communication. If it's free, how does it impact your business? And then just go toward that. Because eventually those guys are spending billions. They're going to figure out how to make it free for you.
Well, the recurring revenue component to that alone is what it is. I've always thought about the fact that you give them the vehicle to be able to do whatever it is you want them to do, and you just charge them for the tolls along the way to keep it moving. That's really the great business model. Bill, what are your thoughts on this disruption concept?
Well, it's interesting. We were just talking about this before. WebEx was around, Skype was around. They were the innovators of webcams, weren't they? Until this little company named Zoom completely blew them out of the water. We're on it right now. I never even heard of Zoom last year, and the thing is, they just made it work. So, you don't have to be the first mover, you have to be the best. And here's the thing, it's reiterative, right? So someone right now is trying to disrupt Zoom. And so they need to stay ahead of it, right? Like for example, my kids, like they were using Zoom last, when the stay at home happened, and now they're using Google. So now they got to figure out what happened, right? So I think it's this, if you think of the game, like Simon Sinek's book, The Infinite Game, it
Mhm.
doesn't actually end. So it's not like you lose, you just lost today, So it's like, I kind of say, yeah, you're going to get disrupted many times. It's how you react. Like we all got disrupted during the stay at home and it was scary, but we're thriving right now. I mean, it just took us a couple months, so and it's crazy. I've never worked harder in my life. I mean, I'm sure Rick, you probably feel the same. I mean, do you ever visit anybody anymore? I mean, you probably were always on site.
Yep.
And Rick, what about the standpoint of people's psyches? I mean, you're dealing with, type A entrepreneurs, CEOs, type A personalities. A lot of them are touchy feely in terms of wanting to be face to face, look somebody in the eye, have a frank conversation, rah-rah the team, work with the accountant or the lawyer to get the deal done if they're an M&A. How are you dealing with those folks and getting them to accept this transition? And more importantly, that this change may be permanent to at least to a percentage of how things are going to be in the future.
One of the interesting things about Zoom is only one of us can talk at a time. And that can be a really big drawback, or it can be a huge advantage. And so for somebody who dominates the room, they can't. Well, they can, and they will, and it'll fall apart. They have to learn how to make time. It's making the space, right? And so for you to facilitate this, you're tapping on Stephen, you're tapping on Bill, you're tapping on myself. You're gonna be tapping on the folks below here in a minute. That's creating space. And so one of the advantages of the Zoom disadvantage is it forces us to look at one at a time and listen and engage in a different way. And so rather than thinking about all the ways, why can't I, meet people in person and all I can'ts, it's how can I now leverage and take advantage of what is, right? There's no point in complaining or bitching and moaning about, I can't do blah, blah. It doesn't matter. How can I leverage this thing? And creating the space and listening to each other, big opportunity.
Is it generational in your mind? Do you see folks from multi-generations being able to embrace it as easily? My kids live in the space.
Yes. It is definitely generational. Obviously the young folks, they just take to this like fish to water. But there are some pretty serious seniors that are into this game in a big way as too. And it has to do with the mindset, right? If your mindset is, well, I can't do this, I think it was Henry Ford that said, whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're right. And so embrace it.
Absolutely.
It's the way we're going to live. So embrace it.
Look, I have a 102-year-old grandmother who still lives by herself in Florida in an apartment and drives a car. She has not been able to see her children, her grandchildren, or her 22 great-grandchildren since COVID hit in person. However, she communicates with us on FaceTime and on her iPad with somebody almost daily. And we showed her how to use it before COVID, which was great when we bought her one. But now she's just like, I'll look down at my phone and it'll be a Sunday night and it'll be Gigi calling, and I'll click the button and have a face-to-face conversation with my grandmother. And I look to myself in my day job with some of the folks who maybe I'm 51, maybe guys who are 10 years older than me, who have trouble figuring out how to turn the camera on while I'm trying to have a conversation with them. And I'm like, look, if my grandmother can do this, you guys who are running a $300 million company should figure this out pretty easily among yourselves, or hire somebody to show you, because if you can adapt, you can adapt. And it all comes down, and in mind, this is all about innovation. It's all about the mindset of thinking about what if and how to embrace what's next. Back to disruption on the concept. And as you look at organizations today, and we're in a disruptive manner, this is a period of time that in my mind is similar to the late 90s and right after the bubble burst in March 2000, when all of that intellectual property that was created during the previous 4 years with money raised on the back of a napkin went up for sale because the dot-com crash, just killed everyone, and people just snapped up all that IP. And you saw a major transformation at that point too. I think we've compressed it to an 18-month period that began in August when people began to recognize where we were at and start to think about what they were going to do. And it'll go through the end of next year. From a disruptive perspective, what in traditional industries are people going to have to do to move their companies forward in a new way? And Steve, I want to start with you because you are in a innovative industry.
First of all, we're just, I don't know what your personal opinion is, but I was asked this in a recent conversation, like, how long am I planning to be grounded, to be living off of Zoom, et cetera? And I keep telling everyone in my company, at least through the end of next year. You know, I said, and I've been saying this since April, I go, this is a year and a half, 2 years, this is not going away. And so instead of crying about it, we just got to figure out and adapt. So, you know, and we do a lot of significant business overseas. And so these Zooms with Japan and with China are brutal because they're at 1 a.m. or 2 a.m. And I tell my team, I go, look, this is what it's going to be, you know, and you better get used to it because it doesn't stop. We got to keep going. And so it's that attitude now is of can do, must do, keep it going, keep momentum, and recognizing that things are a lot slower. They don't happen as fast as they once did, but just always, you know, move the ball forward. Like, don't just sit, you know, keep moving, small steps, you know, just keep cumulatively keep doing it. And that's really what we're emphasizing here. And the challenge we have is, you know, not everybody, I have partners and companies that we deal with that have embraced it and they're working from home and they're up and at them. But I have companies, for example, in Japan that are shelter in place, completely locked down. And the Japanese culture is not one where they work from home. They have tiny apartments. They don't have notebooks. They have desktop computers. And so they're still getting up to speed on how to work with us. You know, we do engineering calls and we're like, one of the guys I'm talking with, he's sitting on his toilet because his kids are in the other room in a small
apartment. He has a
apartment.
virtual background.
Yeah, he needs that because I saw all the shampoo and soap and I'm like, wow, this is kind of crazy.
Bad move.
But, you know, just recognizing that, but just keep moving it forward and I tell my board, look, it's going to take longer.
Yeah.
Not going to happen fast.
Yeah.
We're just
Awesome.
grinding right now. And we're grinding for another year. You know, it's going to be another year easy.
I agree, Steve. I think that's why I said this 18-month period that started, you know, midway through this year, kind of around August. It doesn't mean it's going to end at the end of 2021, but I think you've got that. That's how much time you've got. If you have not figured this out and adjusted by the end of 2021, you are going to be blockbuster. And
well,
Netflix is going to own you.
You know,
For a startup, you know, you got to look burn rate. You know, for me, it's like, whoa, I'm looking at my burn rate. We have a significant milestone. We're going to raise this fall. And we instead raised last spring and raised a chunk of money. Now we have 2.5 years worth of money. And I'm very cautious on the spend. But I'm like, we have to get through this because my competitors are going to fall out. They're not going to make it. Right. And we're in a good spot right now. So I'm thinking good.
And that's hard.
They're struggling.
Yeah.
But do you guys feel what's really neat about this is people maybe did not trust each other before about working from home. I feel that trust now is better. I think people trust each other. I mean, right now, like, let's say this was February of 2019. You're at home. Do people know you're working? Who knows? Now it's like everybody trusts each other. And I'll bet you when we get out of this, whatever it is, when we get out, we're going to trust each other a lot more.
I'm going to say something more to that because this disease that we've had the misfortune in my company. I have an employee lost both his parents and just had his best friend die. Right. My CFO right now is fighting COVID. Yeah, he's a part-timer. He lives in Florida. But I tell everybody in the company, I go, if you feel sick, don't you dare come in here. You know, I told them, you know, through the shutdown, I go, we laid nobody off. I'm not going to lay you off or let you go because you were afraid of this, you know, you came in sick and you're worried about that. I go, if you're sick, I mean, we got to keep this bubble clean here and keep all of our employees operating. If you feel anything, stay home. Stay home for a week. I am not going to fire you. And I reiterate that over the time because we have guys like, oh, I got a little bit of a cold. I go, yeah, turn around, get the hell out of here. I don't care. I can't let you, don't get me sick. I'll be pissed. I'll fire you then if you get me sick. But don't bring it into the damn office. You can work from home. We can work around it. And I really just try to emphasize that every time I talk to we have all hands, or I go walk through the factory. I'm like, guys, if you don't feel good, please do not come in. You're not going to be dinged on that.
Bill, it's funny you mentioned the concept around trust. As I talk to executives and CEOs all across America, and all the cities where we do business, that issue of trust, I was talking to the head of a biopharma company in Philadelphia, and they do clinical trials. And in fact, they've got 52 of the COVID vaccine and treatment things as their clients: Johnson & Johnson, Merck, all those companies, Germany, Sweden, Switzerland, UK, Canada, US, Mexico, all the places are going on. And he said they were never a virtual company. His full-time staff never thought once they would be in a virtual world. And here they are doing clinical trials, and yet they are in a virtual world. 1,500 employees across the world running 52 clinical trials for all these companies. And he said it was a major mindset change for him. And he had spun this company out of Scripps Healthcare originally, and then sold it to Express Scripts, and then bought it back and took it public, and then got private equity and took it private. And all along the way, there was never a chance that they were going to do anything from working from home because of the industry they were in. And if they could do it, I'm interested in, and then I want to open this up to questions from everyone else. What I'm interested in is, as you're dealing with these large companies, Procter and Gamble, Sherwin-Williams, you've got clients that are these monolith companies. How many of them have been able to effectively make this change and still keep the innovative culture that they'd spent so much time building in person?
So it is interesting. Interestingly enough, what I've found is, before, when I had to get on a plane to go to London or to San Francisco, it was a larger stretch for them to work with a company in Cleveland, because you're in a different time zone, you have to fly. It doesn't matter anymore. It really doesn't. I could have a project in somebody in the UK, and it's the same as if I was in UK, because I'm on Zoom. And so it's a level playing field. The funny thing is, I try not to look at things necessarily for the negatives, but look at the advantages. There are so many advantages. I closed 7 deals in August, 7, in a pandemic. I have never done that. It's crazy. But the thing is, we're all talking to each other. Before, I used to be on board meetings where we're on conference call. I didn't even know who was on the call. Now I see everybody. We're all looking at each other, as long as we put our camera on. I'll plug some of the people on here that don't have their cameras on. Put your camera on.
Yeah.
Show your face.
Don't be shy.
I say that all the time. I said, just show your face. And the thing is, it's amazing what happens. Whenever I didn't mean to put everybody on the spot, but when I do a new business call, I send a Zoom link or a Teams link, because I'm 2-3 steps ahead than I would have been before.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
I'll add to that. What I find when I'm outbound calling, trying to do a partnership deal with a company, like I tried for 2 years to do something with Western Digital and could never get through to anybody. But because of the pandemic, guess what? They're all at home and they have time. And I sent a very carefully worded email to the head of strategy, and boom, sure, let's meet. And I find myself, when a sales rep comes to me with a very carefully, not those LinkedIn, those crappy ones that they never looked at your profile, but they send me something that they understand my business and my problem a little bit. 9 times out of 10 now, normally I would ignore it. I let them in. And I've been sold, and I have sold. But you have to be, you spend a little more effort in wording it properly, because, it's that first impression thing. But, it's funny because none of us are traveling.
Yeah.
Right? Before you cold call me, chancer, I'm on a plane, right?
Different times.
Different times.
And this is really,
hey, I'll listen to this person. Sounds like interesting proposal.
and I think innovation is flourishing because of it. We want to take some questions from the audience. So I want to open it up to the folks who are here to ask some questions of these guys. We've had a free-flowing conversation. 90% of this was completely unscripted. I started with one question that we had and just have made this a conversation among the group, really thinking about a bunch of issues around disruption and innovation.
It was good.
But I want to open it up. And Rick, I'm going to turn it over to you because, ladies and gentlemen, I have to bounce into the back room to prep Len Komorowski for the fireside chat. He and I are going to start in 15 minutes. So Rick, I'm going to turn it over to you. Ladies and gentlemen, just unmute yourself, pose a question to this group, keep it free flowing. And I'll see you guys in 15 minutes. Thanks. Great
Thanks,
panel,
Dustin.
guys. Thanks.
Great job.
Rick, you're up. And folks.
So questions from the floor, so to speak. Rick, you look like you have some thinking going on there behind all that brilliant sparkling lights on the ceiling. Pretty cool.
I don't have a whole lot of thinking right this second, but there's been quite a bit that's said here. I come from an industry that doesn't use a whole lot of innovation. I do primarily asbestos abatement. And you want to talk about old school. When I was first taught how to estimate, they handed me a calculator, a pad and a paper. And I said, what do you do? And he said, guess. And I was like, oh, well, what kind of production rate do I use? He's like, well, we don't usually use that. And I was like, how the hell am I ever going to learn? And I ended up showing them after I did learn a few production rates because they finally shared with me. I started showing them what a spreadsheet could do. That was like 20 years ago. And they're like, yeah, I don't think that's going to work because first of all, I don't even have a computer. So I'm not sure that this is going to work. And then take that to 6 months ago, I wanted to start a project management software program within our company. And I had a lot of pushback from the field. And they're like, if you can't get a guy to fill out a piece of paper, how are you going to talk him into hitting a button on a computer? And I said, what if it works? What if it's better? What if it's easier for a guy to hit 3 buttons than to take his pen out and actually mark on a piece of paper? And we just started testing the software because I made him do it. But we just started testing the software, and the 2 guys we have using it right now love it. And they, when I told them they had to do a paperwork job, they were both pissed. So I think it's gonna work, I think.
You know what's funny? The coolest part about experimenting with things is when you get that light bulb aha moment and you're like, wait a second, did you see that? Or it's going to work. Or that was terrible. We're never going to do that. It can go either way. But the most important thing is to experiment.
Yep.
Experiment.
Absolutely.
What can you lose?
Right.
You figure out it's not the good solution. Well, you got one less thing you got to worry about.
Yeah, and I had a supervisor call me last week and say, wait a minute, I don't think that the calendar schedule is going to be met, but I'm way under budget on my hours. How do we get this job done on time? And I just said, for once, I didn't have to be the guy that thought of that. So now I have supervisors thinking like project managers. This could really, really propel us forward.
That's right.
Nothing quite as powerful as information to the hands of the people who can make a change.
Yep.
Absolutely.
If you don't have a specific project or product to focus your creativity at, think of your customers and those vacuums of walking around and looking at what's not there. Why isn't this being done? In a perfect world, wouldn't everything just be this? If you can get over those gaps, that's really powerful stuff. And so I really enjoyed that part of the brainstorming session here. So I just want to toss those 2 cents in.
It's fun when you think about it. One of the games I like to play is imagine yourself 10, 20 years from now saying to somebody, I cannot believe we had to do that. I like to look back and say, can you believe that? Okay, let's play a game. Can you believe that you had to actually fax something? How about, can you believe that you literally had to wait 3 hours before getting on a plane? There's certain things that, are insane. And then that's going to change.
Yeah, the changes are warming. I look at, this phone, right? God, what an enabler to always be connected. And, I remember the first phone I had, it was installed in the back of my car in the trunk, and they cabled it up, and I took it off. Drive down 480, and you go cell to cell, and it would drop out. And you used to pull off the side of the road when I had a good, strong signal. Now it's taken for granted. It's crazy. And big companies miss, because I remember, Intel, when I was at Intel, we had an ARM chip business. And we could have made all the chips for these, but we said, no one's going to use a phone. It's not going to take off. So we sold the damn business. Just boom, shoot ourselves in the head.
I call this the adult teddy bear. Oh, okay, I have my phone. You guys ever done that?
Oh,
Find my phone. Find it. Okay, I know where it is. Isn't that insane?
Yes.
Like, I should not have to carry something. It should be right here.
Buy the wristwatch, right?
That's right. I got this, I got that. But this is insane. It's insane.
Well, worse is, do you ever get on a plane and fly somewhere and forget your phone?
Oh my God.
It's been 3 days away.
Out. But why?
You can't get around. You can't even map anywhere. You get lost.
Yeah, that's insane.
Yeah.
Any other questions from the floor? I picked on Rick. Who should I pick on next?
I'm going to ask a question. My name's Jason. I'm owner of Unified Construction Systems, and we're a construction company dealing with a couple different entities, but all within the commercial construction. So I resonate with, I don't know who it was that mentioned about looking to your customers when you're not working on a specific project or product. In that, I guess for me is, how do you drive innovation with your employees? Because that is probably one of the things that I struggle with the most, is trying to drive, like, I'm not the most tech savvy guy, but I believe they provide a great asset to the business, and trying to get people on board with that is very challenging. And the old saying goes is, if you don't have your employees buy in, there's no sense in doing it. Well, I'm trying to get that engagement, and it seems to be a little lackluster.
I'll take that one if I might. So design everything you do as an experiment. It's the if then, all right? And so and it gets back to quoting. So you're going to do a piece of work, and you think it's going to take you 8 hours. If I do this job, it'll take me 8 hours and I'll get this result. Well, what are the assumptions in there? Well, they have to have all the equipment they needed. It had to be in working order. And as soon as you start framing it up as an experiment and get people thinking about, what is it going to take to make this happen? And when it doesn't happen, what happened, right? What was missing? Oh, we forgot to put the bucket of tar on the trailer, or somebody, returned the whatever tool and it was broken and we didn't discover it. All of a sudden, when you start framing it as an experiment, and it's the same thing that I think Rick was talking about on the project side of things. Once you start understanding what you think is going to happen versus what does happen, the creativity of your crew to solve those little problems that cost you a huge amount, it becomes phenomenal. And I'll tell you, the first time you set it up, there will be pushback. I don't want to use a computer. I don't want to do this. We installed project management at a mining company, and there's shutdowns. And I had somebody walk out of the room and say, I don't want it. You're going to turn me into an effing robot. But that's not what it was about. It's just like, hey, we think it's going to take this long. We'll do these things, see what happens. And the ideas that came out as they started to see the plan not execute the way we thought it would, that's where innovation comes from at the shop floor level. And so set it up as an experiment, Jason. Have them test and measure everything they do. And keep it simple, keep it fun.
And first of all, you have to remember this. As a CEO, your job is to define and enable culture. I mean, it's got to be up there on that list. It's to lead this team and set that culture. I have the opposite position. So we're a spin out of Case Western. I have 9 PhDs on the other side of this wall. And they want to make everything perfect. They want 99.109s of perfection when I need 75%. And getting them to say, it's okay, pass it on. It can go, we can manufacture that, we can go. It's so orthogonal to the way they think to work in a commercial world. And it's to get this culture. I've been here 2 years now, and it's harping on this at every opportunity, saying you got to understand what's good enough, and this messaging continuously and proving to them that yep, it works and it's fine. And it's so hard to get them to shift their thinking. Some of these guys have been academics for 20 years. and I'm breaking everything they were taught. They want to get an A. They want to get an A on the paper when you guys all know it. We're in business. A B does fine, right? An A is extra. But I don't want to set the bar low, but they have to just start to rationalize it. But it's so much over communication. It's spending so much time with them and talking about that in reviewing quarterly. What did we do last quarter? We set the goal here. Well, we got to 10x it. Do we need to get to 10x? Just have this conversation, because if you don't get to 10x, we could have gotten to step 2. We could have moved faster. Speed is a key here. But it's just, I have weekly Monday meetings that are all hands, and then we have big quarterly sit downs, and we set objectives, we set vision. This is what we're working on. This is for you to be aware. And we have ongoing training that goes on so they understand what the other side's doing. It's communicate, communicate, communicate. And the first couple are kind of like when Rick asked you guys if you have any questions. Everyone's quiet, don't say anything. Now, 6 months in, it's a free-for-all. People are asking, what about this? I read this in the newspaper. They read tech journal, business journals. They ask me, well, I heard this happened in Japan. I don't know with Sony. And I'm like, damn, I didn't even read that. I got to time out. Well, explain it to me. What do you think it is? But you gotta have that.
It's funny. It's funny. I was thinking there's this really funny, I love Seinfeld, this really funny stand-up that he did where he said, the number one fear of the average person is public speaking, and the second one is death. And he said that basically people would rather be in the casket than doing the eulogy. And it's like getting your team to talk. Imagine getting them in a room or on a Zoom and saying, right now, for a half an hour, there are literally no bad ideas. And be like, imagine, nothing you say is bad. And you're gonna be amazed that, really, you sure? No, nothing. Nothing's bad. And imagine what'll happen. It may be ridiculously silly for the first half, but you're gonna get 100% gold in the second half. And then they're gonna say, when are we gonna do this again? And then it's on you to do something with it. But the thing is, if you start opening up a dialogue and let them play, the word play, I don't think adults play enough. Kids play all the time. And if you just think about playing and being fun, you're gonna realize serious gets really cool,
My shortest consulting gig was 1 week when I got factory that was jam-packed. And we got 2 teams. We organized the 2 teams, said, okay, it's a competition. Let's see who can get this stuff out. And a week later, I come back. Factory, everything was out the door. They had a ton of cash. They were doing their modernization. Thank you very much. That was wonderful. It's fun. Creativity comes out of fun. Creativity comes out of play. The research is all there.
That's awesome.
Have fun.
A lot of great responses.
Cool. Yeah, and by the way, all this stuff is really hard, and just get over it, right? It's not hard. It's terrifying sometimes. Yeah. What else are you gonna do?
But you also, someone mentioned about having that one employee that's like, I'm not gonna do this, but yep. The grouchy old guy. I kind of got one of those. Well, I'm not using Zoom. I don't.
Well, say what's the alternative? What are your ideas? Come up with ideas.
Exactly. You just got to sit with them and understand what that fear is, and kind of get over yourself. Come on.
Yeah.
This is the way it is.
What do you want to do? We're all ears.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we're at that point where I think we got. Pull up the calendar here. What do I do with it?
Next meeting.
10:25. Yep, we got 5 minutes to transition back to the main session room. Thank you all for participating. Thank you for your questions, Rick and Jason. And anybody has any other questions, you'll have our contact information. Just reach out. And
all right, back to reality.
Thank you.
Back to it.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Bill. Thanks, Steve. Great job.
All right, see ya.
Thanks, everyone.